Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Raj Persaud. I'm a consultant psychiatrist and I work in private practice in Harley Street, London, the United Kingdom. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the psychology of America today, and in particular, doing a psychiatric analysis of this famous phrase, make America great again. But you're probably immediately wondering why I'm wearing this hat. This was the closest I could come to what I felt was like a Chicago gangster from the 1930s type hat, or maybe even a cowboy hat. So I'm trying to capture, to some extent, the essence of America in this hat, because we're going to be talking a little bit about the psychology of America and doing a psychiatric deconstruction of this phrase that's become very famous, but I think has slid under the radar in terms of people really understanding the deep psychological significance of the phrase, make America great again. And I'm going to be arguing that basically you're going to take a direct link. If you understand the psychology, the deep psychology of the phrase, there's a cascade of links that will take us to World War III. I believe we can already see the ingredients of World War III embedded in the phrase, make America great again. But let's just talk about the hat first of all, because you don't need to be Sigmund Freud to realize that the excuse I just gave you for wearing the hat is a massive psychological rationalization. I've obviously got a bit of a hat thing going on. I mean, in fact, it's such a deep problem that my wife has me on an app so that anytime I go near Bond Street in London, which is the major area where there are these expensive emporiums selling hats, the app which tracks my progress around London sets off an alarm, and she calls me immediately and she says down the phone, put the hat down and step away from the vehicle. Often in the evening in our house, she'll open a cupboard upstairs. I'm banished to the vaults. She'll open a cupboard upstairs and hats will fall out on her. And she'll shout down the stairs, "You've been buying hats again." So anyway, this is a rationalization for this deep psychological problem I have over hats. Okay, so let's talk about this phrase, which is very important because make America great again probably was one of the reasons why Donald Trump got re-elected in an astonishing election victory, which caught everyone by surprise, media pundits and the Democrat Party in particular. So perhaps one of the reasons he was victorious was because of this phrase, make America great again. And it is striking that the Democrats never really came up with a competitive phrase to beat it or to be in conflict with it or to antagonize it. And as a result, maybe that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump got elected. So therefore, the phrase is extremely important. It's very important, but it's never really been properly psychologically or psychiatrically deconstructed to understand a lot of things that are going on within this phrase, which is why the phrase is so important and why it's so powerful and why it may explain Donald Trump's electoral and popular success. So if we think about this phrase, make America great again means it's not great now, but it was great in the past. And if it was great in the past and it's not great now, then clearly embedded in the phrase is an important idea, which is that the decline of America. So it's a kind of complaint. We've declined. Okay. The next question is, how come we've declined? It's very important for politicians, if they're going to be successful, they never blame the electorate. They never blame their voters for the problems the country's in. So what's cleverly embedded in this phrase is Americans were great. They're not great now, or America's not great now. And basically, it's not our fault. Okay. It must be the fault of someone else. Therefore, we have enemies, non-Americans. So make America great again is basically saying we're in decline. We're not in decline because of anything we did wrong. We're in decline because we've got enemies, and these enemies are foreigners. So make America great again, embedded in it is an idea, which is that we have enemies abroad, non-Americans, and they're the reason why America is not great anymore. And you can begin to see the seedlings of things like tariffs, for example, to protect America and keep America American. And you can also see embedded in the phrase is a legitimizing of this immigration policy, which is let's stop these people coming in and let's evict a lot of them, because they're the reason why America is not great again. So one of the problems with the phrase and the deep cleverness of it psychologically is it never discusses what it means to be great. What was great about America, if it was great? Was it great because it was a competitive society? Was a wealthy society? Was it a society of opportunity? Was it innovative in some special way? What exactly was great about America? And that is skated over. Implicit, therefore, in the idea, if it's skated over, is that America was great because it was America. Okay? The reason why greatness exists, generally speaking, is because someone somewhere has done something to create greatness. The reason why Roger Federer is perhaps one of the greatest tennis players of all time, a great tennis player, is because he played tennis really well and he won a lot of championships. He won a lot of Grand Slam tournaments, a lot of very important tournaments. So he was a very good player. Why was he a good player? Well, he was a talented player, but he also worked really hard at it. Okay, so the man had skill. So if we were going to say Roger Federer is great, no one is any doubt as to the causal mechanism of the greatness, which is the training, the sweat, blood and tears, the hard work the man put into it, plus his talent and his ability to keep his nerve. A lot of things going on here that explain his greatness. So the embedded in the phrase "make America great again" is a skating over of what greatness are we referring to. And in doing that, there's an implicit idea that America is great because, not because of hard work, not because of organizational skills, not because of liberty or freedom or something special in those areas. Because what's interesting about hard work, organizational ability, and so on is any other country can do those things, okay? Any other country can have citizens that work hard, perhaps harder than Americans, can have organizational ability, can have freedom, can have competitiveness, etc., can have talented individuals. And as a result, if you think hard about greatness, there's nothing specific to a nationality, surely, that conveys greatness or confirms greatness on a people. It is the talent of the people, the hard work of the people, something they do that produces greatness. And whatever it is they do, why is it other people can't do it as well? Perhaps even do it better. So what exactly are we referring to greatness? That's skated over by the phrase. That's part of the power and the cleverness of it. Because if we start to think too hard about what greatness are we referring to, we're going to start running into a bit of trouble. Okay. And then the other thing is, why was America great? What was it that made it great? And then we're going to run into trouble because we're going to discover that the ingredients of any greatness, hard work, for example, intelligent analysis, organizational ability, having a plan, etc., these are all things that other countries can do, other people can do. The thing that made Roger Federer great, there's no reason why another tennis player can't apply themselves in a very similar way and perhaps eventually beat Roger Federer by doing any of the things that Roger Federer does well, even better. There's nothing specific to being Swiss. Roger Federer is Swiss. That's implicit in the idea that the greatness of Roger Federer has something to do with his being Swiss. So embedded in the phrase "make America great again" are some very dangerous ideas. And the ideas are that we shouldn't think too hard about why people are great, what makes them great, and we shouldn't think too hard about the essence of the greatness we're referring to. Instead, we should think about the idea that America was intrinsically great, which is already a dangerous idea, in my opinion, for the reasons I've outlined before. And therefore, if we're not great now, something's happened that's preventing us from being great. It's not us. It's not the fact we don't work hard or we're not as competitive. It must be that we have enemies that are causing the problem. Let's take a couple of specific examples that genuinely genuinely did make America unique in the 20th century. And let's take two major innovations: the creation of the atom bomb, the Manhattan Project, and putting a man on the moon. What's unique about that in the 20th century is no other nation did that. Yes, the Russians competed, and the Russians also created an atom bomb, but the Americans got there first. And they got there first because of the Manhattan Project. They threw a lot of money at the problem, amazing organizational skills, recruiting talent from all over the world. Ironically, a lot of that talent fled Germany, so it was the oppression of the German regime that led the talent to flee Germany and head to America. So there's something about the freedom of America, the democracy of America, and the money it had, and the organizational skills, and the intellectual talent and openness to ideas that explains why they created the first atom bomb. And very similar reasons for putting a man on the moon. Again, ironically, a lot of the rocket scientists and physicists were actually Germans or ex-Nazis that fled to the US or were recruited directly by the US, ironically enough. So again, no other nation has yet put a man on the moon, or a woman on the moon, or a person on the moon. So again, this is testament to something that America did that was genuinely great and uniquely American. But it happened for reasons that happened to be in America at the time. But there's no reason why another country could not come along at some point in the future and put a man on the moon. I'm pretty certain the next country that's going to do that is probably China. And once you can begin to see that other countries can start to rival America, you've got a problem over this idea that that America is intrinsically great. So the reason why I'm very interested in this as a psychiatrist is that there's a direct link here with paranoia, a psychiatric phenomenon, delusions, particularly delusions of grandeur, and paranoia, and then conspiracy theory. So let's look at grandiose delusional thinking, which is something that psychiatrists have a lot of direct experience of. And I'm going to link this back to Make America Great Again. I see patients, and again, this will come maybe as a bit of a surprise, because the ordinary people don't have contact with psychotic people quite so often as psychiatrists do, and delusional thinking. So people suffering from a psychiatric disorder, which is a serious psychiatric disorder, relatively rare, maybe 1 to 4% of the population will get the psychotic disorder at some point in their lives. We could think about terms like schizophrenia or a bipolar disorder. But when you become psychotic, you lose contact with reality. You may hear voices, you may hallucinate. But one of the paradigmatic central themes of psychosis is believing strange things that clearly can't be true. And a classic one is to believe you're God, you're Jesus Christ, you're the second coming. And those delusions of grandeur are things that I've encountered in my clinic and my experience as a psychiatrist. I worked in the British National Health Service, running my own ward and inpatient unit, dealing with people who've been committed to hospital involuntarily under the Mental Health Act legally. They were so ill, they were a danger to themselves or other people. And as a result, I've dealt as a psychiatrist with some of the illest people you can get in terms of psychiatric disorder. And psychosis would be up there with that kind of diagnosis. And I've dealt and have direct experience of psychotic thinking. So a delusion of grandeur, you wake up one morning, you've developed a psychotic disorder, and you believe you're God. Okay? And I've had patients confirm this and say this to me, that they believe they're God. It's not an uncommon psychotic delusion. So you're sitting around thinking you're God. Then you've got to think, how do I explain the fact, despite the fact I'm God, I'm unemployed and living in a bedsit in a rather disheveled part of London? So if you're God and yet somehow people aren't sort of lining up to worship you, you've got to try and explain this contradiction between the delusional belief that you're God, and it doesn't seem that your life's panning out as if you are God. So how do you explain the two things that you're living with? The belief that you're God, and yet somehow it doesn't look like you're leading a godlike life. In fact, things are pretty tough. You're on unemployment benefit, and you're living in a bedsit flat by yourself, and everyone ignores you. So the way you explain the two things is you are God, you are someone special, but you're not making it in the world as you ought to because someone is preventing you. And now you arrive in paranoid conspiracy theory. And this is how paranoia and conspiracy theory develops in psychotic people. Okay, I'm God, yet I'm not making it. Therefore, someone must be preventing me from making it. I have enemies. I'm being followed around by the CIA or the Russians, and they're conspiring to stop me claiming my rightful place on the throne. I want you to see a direct link between delusions of grandeur, collision with the reality of the world, which is you're not really living the grand life. How do we explain that? It has to be explained by someone stopping it. And someone stopping it means now you have enemies, and you're vigilant for these enemies because they're explaining why you're not making it in the world. So make America great again, you could say, is a delusional belief of grandeur, that America is intrinsically great and yet somehow is not making it in the world. The Chinese seem to be making iPhones, not Americans. And why is that? What's going on? Aha! I know what's going on because I know we're great. Okay? Therefore, we must have enemies, and they're conspiring against us, and they're stopping us taking our rightful place in the world, which is making iPhones or making chips, computerized chips, NVIDIA. Taiwan is making better chips than the Americans are. Why is that? If America's great and we're great, and the Taiwanese aren't as great as us, what's going on? What's going on is they're cheating. Okay, something's going on whereby we're not claiming our rightful place on the throne, and these enemies out there are preventing it. Let's take tennis as an example, because I've used Roger Federer earlier, and I play a lot of tennis. I'm quite competitive. Let's say the Americans go, we're great. We've got the greatest tennis players. So how come they're not winning Grand Slams? You know why they're not winning Grand Slams? Despite the fact America is great and we have the greatest tennis players, the other side are cheating. That's why we're not winning Grand Slams. So we're not going to play with them anymore because they're cheating. We're going to pull up the drawbridge and we're just going to play with ourselves in America. Forget those cheating foreigners. That's why we're not winning Grand Slams. So what happens when you pull up the drawbridge and you mount big tariffs and you only play with yourselves is you don't get any better at tennis. In fact, you get worse if you don't actually play against the best, okay? So things slide downhill, and this happens again with psychotic people with delusions of grandeur sitting around claiming unemployment benefits. Things slide further and further downhill because you don't collide, you don't properly get a sense of what the reality is. Reality is you can't sit around just claiming to be God and therefore expect a nice life. You've got to go out and work for a living. You've got to go out and compete with the Taiwanese or the Chinese, make better chips or iPhones. And that's how you achieve greatness. So what happens if you just develop delusions of grandeur that you are intrinsically great without actually having to do the work to be great, is you've got to explain why you're not making it. And you go down the belief system, which is you have enemies and they're preventing you from making it. And therefore we must do something about these enemies. And the first step is you become isolationist. You want to pull away from the rest of the world. But as things slide further and further, because you're not really addressing the central issues here, which is you've got to compete and you've got to work harder, you've got to figure out how to beat the other tennis players rather than simply accuse them of cheating, things slide further and further downhill, your economy gets worse and worse, and now the government, or Trump, has to go to war in a real sense, not a trade war or a mock war, but a real war, for two reasons. One is wars are a great way to distract the population from the fact things aren't really working out at home. Nations unite at a time when it could be divisive for the nation to be failing. They unite against a common enemy. So wars are a great solution when things are heading downhill. And it may be no accident there was a thing called World War II following the Depression around the world, and particularly the Deep Depression in Germany and hyperinflation. So maybe there was a link between the two things. So war happens for that reason. The other reason why war happens goes back to delusional paranoid beliefs. You're God, you're not making it, therefore you must have enemies. The CIA are following you around and hamstringing your ability to claim your rightful place on the throne. And as you keep going further and further into that belief system, the enemies multiply. They're everywhere. First of all, they were just following you around outside the house. Now they're inside the house, bugging you, fiddling around with the TV set, explains why things like the TV stopped working, etc., etc. The enemy spread, and eventually the only way to deal with the enemies is to go to war to fix them once and for all, because they just seem to be getting more and more powerful as you fail more and more. So there's a direct link, in my opinion, and if you follow the psychiatry and follow what happens to psychotic people, a nation can go psychotic. This is my contention. And as a result, eventually you can get from Make America Great Again to World War III, which is a very sobering thought. And that's why I'm bringing it up. And I want people to begin to think about that, to try and prevent World War III from happening. Though I do feel, I'm afraid, we're doomed. One final point is I'm speaking to you from London, United Kingdom. And you know, the funny thing about this Make America Great Again thing is we started it here in Britain because we're called Great Britain. Okay? So, right, we started the whole thing off with a Great Britain thing, which is Britons are just naturally great, just because they're Britons. Okay? And again, that was not a very helpful idea in the long run. Guess what? The British Empire, the greatest empire the world has ever seen, an empire on which the sun never set. Eventually, Britain withdrew from it, went into decline for reasons we need to think hard about, because maybe greatness, that you get complacent if you just think you're great because you're British. You get complacent and you don't keep doing the hard work necessary to stay great. So we started the whole thing off with the whole Great Britain thing. So, you know, we shouldn't be too condescending about Trump and Make America Great Again. But I want to make another prediction. I've predicted there's a direct link between Make America Great Again and World War III. I think how long before, I mean, after all, the man has renamed the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. How long before it's now going to be called Great America?